Hello everyone. Welcome to the final lecture, the lecture 13 for our series for EDUC2065, Professionalism, Leadership and Management in Early Childhood. Today's lecture is just going to summarise all of the content that we have covered for this course, specifically focusing on the duty of care and going beyond that duty of care, how we as early childhood educators are tasked with advocating on behalf of young children and families, and just making sure that we've covered all of our bases in terms of passing this course. So, understanding advocacy and what our role is as early childhood educators is to understand that advocacy is about promoting and defending another person's rights, needs, and interests. An advocate is somebody who speaks up for others. Children and young people are relatively powerless groups in society, and children don't have political power. They have limited say in their decisions that affect their lives, and they're generally unable to do anything about it if decisions that are taken are contrary to their best interests. So they rely on us as one group who needs to be active in our advocacy for their rights. Adults very often make significant decisions about children without consulting them or seeking to involve them in the decision-making process. Children are rarely informed or consulted, for example, about new laws or new policies which are going to impact them. They're frequently denied rights and opportunities which other members of the community can take for granted. Many laws treat children and young people not as people, but as sort of property of their parents or as objects of concern. Many laws and policies are based sometimes on outdated ideas, and there is a considerable imbalance between children and young people and government agencies, such as between the police and schools. It's important that we understand that sometimes children aren't heard by many of the adults who make the decisions that can affect them most. Teachers and school administrators, governments who decide what resources will and won't be available to their families or even to the children themselves, sometimes by welfare workers or magistrates or by the police. So children really do rely to a very large extent on adults to speak on their behalf and be active in protecting their rights. Children can be vulnerable and they may find it hard to speak up for their own rights and their own needs and their own interests. And this vulnerability can be reinforced by society's attitudes and sometimes even by the processes of the law. Children might need an advocate if they are at risk of harm, if they are not having their needs met, or if they are being denied their rights. They need advocates because they cannot look after their own interests. Parents are supposed to do this for them, and some don't, and some can't. The Australian Law Reform Commission has recently stated, children are grossly disadvantaged in protecting their interests, rights and freedoms. Our legal system denies them a voice, bullied into silence as witnesses, lost in care, expelled without recourse from schools, exploited and abused on the streets and in the systems designed to protect them. In principle, children as people have the legal right and interest in having a say in decisions that are likely to affect them. Children as citizens should have better access to the processes of government that directly affect them. Children as human beings with social rights ought to have equal access to the law, and that the community has a duty to take their rights and children seriously. This is a fairly powerful message. Decisions are often made by professionals with children's views not being sought, or if they are ascertained, they're sometimes ignored or discounted. Children are the passive recipients of decisions made on their behalf by powerful adults. Okay, so how do we advocate? Being an advocate involves understanding the issues involving children, thinking about children's needs from their perspective, and presenting solutions, not just complaining about problems. Children require both systemic advocacy and advocacy as individuals. So even when there's a reasonable standard of services for children, advocacy still plays an important role. Assisting children and their families to navigate their way through the complex maze of bureaucratic processes to gain access to services is essential. Children as a group are helped to take an active role in matters that affect all children through broad-based systemic advocacy. And advocacy of individual children remains necessary and important. As early childhood educators, we should know and understand children better than anybody else. If people are making decisions for and about children, we are well positioned to help make sure that these decisions are in children's best interests. So sometimes that means that we have to speak out in a way that prevents any harmful or inappropriate or unethical practice from impacting children. Occasionally, if we have noticed something and we've made a formal complaint or report, we might need to follow up on that to ensure that a system or a process or an action has been rectified. If we have to, we sometimes have to bring up the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and point out where there have been breaches or practices that violate any one of those rights. We need to ensure that we are scrutinising and monitoring government school services and programs. And sometimes it means we then have to lobby for change. And it may be lobbying the government, it may be lobbying our school leadership or the department or government, all on behalf of the child. In recent tutorials and lectures, we've been speaking about the Early Childhood Code of Ethics. This is an extension and is also an international agreement for children's rights called the United Nations Convention Rights of the Child. 30 years ago, world leaders made a historic commitment to the world's children by adopting the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is an international agreement about childhood. It has become the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history, and it has helped transform children's lives around the world. And Australia is a signatory of this agreement. We need to advocate to ensure that leaders from government, business, communities fulfill this commitment and they take action for children's rights to make sure that every single child has every single right. And while we are a signatory in Australia, still not every child gets to enjoy a full childhood, as stated in this document. Too many childhoods are cut short, and it is up to our generation and our profession at times to demand that leaders from government, business, and communities fulfill their commitments and take action for children's rights now and once and for all. They must commit to making sure that every child has every right. If you haven't visited and looked at this particular website before and you have not yet read the UN Convention for Children's Rights, it's imperative that you do this as you embark upon this career in early childhood. It's an essential document. And so, in reflecting upon this course that we are coming to the end to, if we think back to some of the early weeks of this course where we were looking at breaches of specifically duty of care, usually in school or in childcare centres, these types of headlines that you can see on the screen now were some of the reasons why this course exists. It's also one of the reasons why we need to ensure that everybody who is working with children understands their obligations and their not just their legal obligations, but also their ethical obligations. Most of these that you can see over here are due to inadequate supervision. And that is the number one takeaway that we want everybody to sort of leave and graduate this course with a very clear understanding of. For example, that third one there, the Western Australian Childcare Centre left a toddler on the bus. That child was on that bus for over 2 hours before anybody noticed. So it's imperative that we are ensuring that we are fulfilling our responsibilities in terms of children's safety and ensuring our colleagues are doing the same. It is not just childcare centres, however, we will see on the next slide. These headlines are ones that you may have seen over the past couple of years related to breaches of duty of care occurring in schools. There is an increase in some of these incidents that are happening in schools. And again, it comes down to people reporting, people taking action, and people making sure that they're lobbying for change where possible. And this is where the courts have a role to play in supporting these processes and these places to be accountable. So, in reflection, when we're thinking about schools and policies and the law, it's important that we take a minute or two to really think about the professional, ethical, and legal responsibilities of this career that you've chosen. In the first few weeks, we looked at teachers' legal responsibilities in the school environment, and the rest of the unit focused on the childcare setting. We talked about the impact and the effect that the law has on education. And sometimes it is leading the way. So the laws will be made and then schools have to act accordingly. And sometimes incidents that happen in schools will then impact upon the law. So there's that reciprocal relationship. As a consequence of this, there is a real need for principals, classroom teachers to have an understanding of the law that is sufficient to be in a position to manage legal issues or problems that may arise. So again, if you think back to those first few weeks, this doesn't mean that we need to be lawyers or have legal degrees, but we do need to be aware of the legal issues that relate to teaching. We need to come at this area with an understanding that incidents happen very quickly in classrooms, but courts still have an expectation that teachers demonstrate sound supervision and adequate management skills when those incidents happen in a very short time frame. A key concept of this course that we covered early, and one that needs to be refreshed in our memories as we embark upon our careers and our pracs, is the notion of duty of care. The definition is that it is a duty imposed by the law to take care to minimise the risk of harm to another, and this duty requires not only the protection from known hazards, but also protection from harm that could foreseeably arise and against which preventative measures can be taken. We are entering the early childhood education and care profession, and we don't just have a duty of care, we also have a duty to care. Caring for students assumes different meanings depending upon the context. The official guidelines tell us that it's not putting students at risk by doing something or failing to do something that could cause the student to suffer injury or harm. We also need to take precautions. We need to intervene to prevent obvious hazards from causing injury or harm. We need to follow safety procedures and also to provide adequate instructions to students. Teachers across Australia have a professional duty of care for every single one of their students. And essentially, a duty of care is a common law concept that outlines the responsibility of school personnel to provide students with adequate levels of protection against harm. What constitutes this reasonable care is going to vary according to the specific circumstances of the incident or the context, but some of the factors can include the level of care that varies inversely with the age of students. The younger the student, the more active and intense the care. The level of care is also increased where students are known to behave in a manner that increases the risk of injury. So these are our behaviour management strategies and intervention strategies in classroom management. Students who have physical or intellectual disabilities that may require higher levels of care and attention and planning. Students who may be affected by a medical condition who also require particular consideration, and often increased care is required in relation to activities that have an inherently higher level of risk of injury. Teaching staff may breach their duty of care if reasonable care is not exercised when we are choosing another person to care for students. So the person that we are leaving the students with, if we are exiting from our duty of care, so if we're going on yard duty or if we're going to another lesson or if we're leaving the classroom for some reason, we meet our duty of care obligation by ensuring that the person that we are leaving the students with is somebody who is an appropriate person. Another key concept from this course that we have been talking about, but also talking around a little throughout the tutorials, is what is becoming more and more apparent in society is that the policies and practices that exist in our schools are actually being increasingly challenged by those who feel that their rights have either not been met or that they have been violated in some way. Some of these challenges are coming from families, some of these are coming from students who are now adults, who experienced some event or events in their schooling period or in their care period, and have now had serious implications that have gone through into adulthood, and so they're seeking redress, by the courts. Sometimes it's from schools themselves, and sometimes it's from policymakers or the community. So understanding our legal obligations and meeting those legal obligations is an essential part of succeeding in our chosen career and ensuring that we are protecting ourselves and fulfilling our rights as we care for children, because it is such an important career choice. It's an essential part of our society. Back in week 2, when we were talking about duty of care, we were reminded that duty of care attaches to teachers, it will attach to childcare workers and also to caregivers, but it does not actually legally attach to a parent. So we do have a higher duty of care expectation and obligation than parents. A duty of care always exists, but it doesn't mean that just because we have a duty of care and the child hurts themselves, that it's an automatic liability situation, because we understand too that injuries can happen, but there is no liability. The factors that are relevant in determining whether there's been a breach of duty of care, I'll go through shortly. Children, and particularly young children, need protection from their environment. They need protection from others and from themselves. Generally, reasonable steps should be taken to guard against foreseeable conduct on the part of children that may result in harm to themselves or others, keeping in mind that it is a young child's job to be mischievous. So when we're looking at an injury and determining whether or not it is just an injury that has occurred as a day-to-day, but everyone's legal obligations were met, so it is a true accident, or if there has actually been a breach of duty of care, we need to apply these 5 factors to the situation. Was there a foreseeability of harm occurring? In other words, if the situation was suggested to somebody else, was it foreseeable that harm was going to occur? Was it likely to occur? It's not a remote possibility, it's a likely possibility. The magnitude of the risk of that harm occurring, which is really talking about what is the degree of probability that it's going to occur. In other words, will this action typically normally result in some sort of injury or harm? The gravity of the harm that may take place, which is the degree of seriousness and harm, the cost and practicability of preventing it, and the justifications for running the risk. So all of those 5 need to be applied for there to be a breach of duty of care in the eyes of the law. If someone does not act in a way or provide an appropriate standard of care to somebody that they have a duty of care towards, then they have breached their duty of care. If you've not done something, or if you have done something that you should not have done, and then this action or this lack of action results in harm or injury to a child in your care, and it can be proven, then you have breached your duty of care. Sometimes, if the required standard of care is not exercised and duty of care is breached and it causes damage, then the person who has been negligent can be sued. Negligence is a breach of a legal duty to take care, which results in damage to the claimant. In this course, we also examined bullying. We looked at bullying in terms of through the lens of our legal responsibilities around this issue. We explored the elements of bullying being a repeated negative action or actions towards a specific person or group that is intended to distress. This distress and harm or fear on the part of the student who is targeted is usually the result of an imbalance of power that favours the person or persons taking these aggressive actions. Bullying in any form or for any reason can have serious and long-term effects on those involved, including on bystanders. Some of those long-term effects include mental, social, physical effects that track well into adulthood. We also explored that students who bully others frequently, through our research, know that often that can lead to having a criminal record or violence appearing in adolescence or in adulthood. Students who are frequently bullied can often end up with interpersonal difficulties through adolescence and through adulthood. And students who bully or who are bullied, so both of those groups, when we do longitudinal studies, we can see that they end up with the poorest outcomes. So it is incumbent upon everyone who interacts with young children and who is aware of bullying as an issue is well positioned to be able to intervene and provide children with strategies and processes to help reduce the impacts of bullying and the existence of bullying in the first place. The National Safe Schools Framework was developed in response to concerns from parents and the wider community and the expectations that Australian education authorities take every possible measure to ensure the physical and emotional safety of students. The vision being that all Australian schools are safe places, supportive and respectful teaching and learning communities, and that they promote student well-being. New and emerging challenges for school communities such as cyber safety, cyberbullying, and community concerns about young people and weapons were raised when the National Safe Schools Framework was developed. Schools expressed their concerns about where is their area of responsibility exactly, given that many bullying activities follow students home now with technologies, or they begin at home and is outside of the purview of school. The National Safe Schools Framework is the only framework of its kind in the world, and it does need to be reviewed regularly to ensure that it remains current and relevant in today's context. In week 4's lecture, we were lucky to have guest speaker Tim Wong, the child safety lead from Catholic Education Western Australia, speak to us about some of the child protection obligations that we have as teachers and early childhood educators. He talked about the maltreatment of persons under the age of 18 years is the result of an action or inaction on the part of a person who has the responsibility to care for a child that ends up resulting in harm or injury. He spoke about the categories of abuse: emotional, physical, sexual, and then also neglect, and the later body of research coming about from witnessing family violence and the impact of that upon children. Often abuse doesn't occur in isolation. If 39% of children are being neglected, then they might also be suffering emotional implications like poor attachment or lack of connection. And if they are experiencing physical abuse, then they may also be hungry and suffering from maltreatment. So some of these categories don't stand alone. Sometimes, unfortunately, they overlap. For example, if 20% of children are being sexually abused, then they're also suffering emotional abuse, grooming, and physical abuse. In Australia, a case of child abuse is reported every 2.5 minutes. Almost 3 times as many girls as boys have substantiations of sexual abuse, but boys are more likely to be physically abused. 2/3 of substantiations are for children 10 years old and under, and children with an intellectual disability are at the highest risk of sexual abuse. Research has indicated sexual abuse statistics range between 65% and 85% for these young people. The law states that we are mandatory reporters. We are legally obliged to report certain beliefs about child sexual abuse that have formed in the course of our work. The maximum penalty for us failing to mandatory report is $6,000. School staff should be able to recognise and respond to indicators of child abuse and neglect. We should be able to understand the effects of abuse and neglect on the development of children and young people. We need to comply with agreed policies and procedures related to child protection, understand our obligations as mandatory reporters of child sexual abuse, keep ourselves safe, provide personal safety and child protection curricula to children under our care. Since 2009, the law requires mandatory reporting by teachers, doctors, nurses, midwives, and police of child sexual abuse when a mandatory reporter forms a belief based on reasonable grounds in the course of their work that child sexual abuse is occurring. Childcare workers have also been included into this category. During this course, we also spent a few weeks covering the National Quality Framework, the NQF being established under applied law system comprising the law and regulations that applies to most long day care, family daycare, outside school hours care, preschool and cater year 2 in Australia. ASIQA, or the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority, is recognised as the national authority responsible for guiding the implementation and ongoing administration of the NQF across Australia. We do understand that we have compulsory national standards in the quality rating system associated with the NQF, and this is to ensure high quality and consistent early childhood education across the nation. It also addresses those 7 aspects of what is a high quality service, and those ranged from features of the physical environment to staff and child ratios, staff qualifications, as well as the educational program and the way it's delivered and how we relate to children, what our relationships are like. The national standards are supported for the first time by the EYLF, the Early Years Learning Framework, which outlines the key outcomes of an effective early childhood program. The NQS, the National Quality Standard, comprises quality areas, standards, and elements. And we did an incredibly great job in our tutorials covering these in our group presentations, those 7 quality areas, those 15 standards, and those 40 elements. As part of the NQF system, each service provider receives an overall rating following an assessment by a qualified assessor. The rating system provides information to parents and the wider community and assures them that the service is meeting the national quality standard. A new national body is going to oversee the application of a national quality standard across the country and ensure that services are meeting requirements. ASEQA provides oversight of the NQS and its application across Australia to ensure that services are meeting all requirements. And we also discussed the qualifications and the leadership styles and qualities that directly affect these standards. Which brings us to the role of the educational leader. The NQF highlighted the role of the educational leader in the national law and regulations relating to the NQS, and this provided the regulatory framework for most centres. So as of 2014, every service needs to have a designated educational leader, and we know from Regulation 118 that we lead the development and implementation of the educational programs. It makes sense for the educational leader, so that person, to be the person that's acquired the greatest knowledge of education theories and research, knowledge of curriculum approaches and the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. That person should have a knowledge of learning styles to meet the needs of individual children who may have varying abilities. This means an educational leader doesn't just require a sound understanding of the EYLF outcomes, it also requires an understanding of how each of those principles and practices contribute to a high quality learning experience for little people. To guide others in their planning, to guide others in reflection practices, and to guide others in implementation of new procedures, policies, and curriculum, educational leaders need to be able to work with others to plan, to work collaboratively to ensure that programs actually reflect the principles that we hold. We need to be able to watch these processes in action and to do some active reflection to ensure that we are actually walking what we're talking. We were also fortunate in this course to have a second two guest speakers in week 7 from EDUC2065, and they spoke to us specifically about the national law and national regulations as they are enforced by EDUC2065. So the national law being that it provides for the initial assessment and rating, a reassessment and re-rating process, and then a review of assessment and application for the highest rating, which is obviously that excellent rating. They also unpacked what the assessment and rating process is, and they looked at different trends that occurred that they've noticed in Western Australia and also in the nation. Remembering that there are 5 levels of that rating system that Jodie and Lauren spoke about, the lowest being significant improvement required, then working towards, then meeting, then exceeding, and finally with excellent. Jodie and Lauren also spoke about those assessment and rating visits where the assessor will gather evidence. The 3 modes of evidence gathering are observing practice, discussing practice and procedures, and citing policies and procedural documentation. Each quality area requires a combination of these modes to collect evidence to determine whether or not the elements are being met or not met. As evidence is gathered, we write behavioural notes to inform decision making when allocating ratings. Later on, you may learn about using evidence prompts in the evidence gathering process, and these are an important part of the NQS lens that we adopt when assessing and rating services, and it'll help us make ratings based on the evidence. In other words, we're going to be asked questions by the assessors, and we need to be prepared to be able to provide evidence to help answer those questions and address those areas. Assumed evidence, judgments, and prejudices can be dangerous, and it can unfairly affect the rating of a service. So the job is to use the NQS as the tool and the lens that enables you to be an unbiased observer of the service. So assessors have an obligation to also not be coloured by prejudice or judgment, and to be as objective as possible in the process of assessing a service. We covered the quality areas as aspects of service provision that are critical to quality, critical to making ECEC services and OSH services as high quality as is possible. Please understand that the order of these is not an indicator of importance or priority. They are all of equal merit. An introductory statement for each quality area provides context and the rationale, and there is also a list of the standards and elements that fall within that quality area, and these are all available obviously on the ASEQA website. The standards under each quality area outline what services have to do to meet the NQS, and these are the essential requirements that services must meet. Each of the 7 standards has a number of elements. Examples of practice are provided for each element, and the examples detail what would the element look like in everyday practice and the way the element will be assessed. In this course, we also covered some aspects of child safety. We discussed the notion and obligation of prevention and understanding that sometimes genuine accidents occur. They are sometimes unavoidable in early childhood services in schools. The very nature of childcare and children playing means that accidents are going to sometimes happen. However, in order to provide an environment which minimises risk to the health and safety of the children in the care, staff need to be vigilant with our supervision and with our actions, ensure children are supervised at all times, and conduct regular inspections of the childcare premises to identify potential hazards both inside and outside. These sorts of actions help reduce the number and severity of incidents, and it also helps in the defence of an allegation of negligence that may be made against the centre. So in other words, if we are meeting our obligations for supervision, vigilance, preparing activities that are safe, conducting regular inspections, and then an accident still occurs, we are far less likely to be negligence to be able to be proven, because we have fulfilled our responsibilities as they relate to child safety. Developing safety policies for the teachers to be able to manage risk and provide protection and promote safety in early childhood education environments is critical. There should be several policies that address the educational aspects of safety in any workplace, in any early childhood education and care service. Basic safety policies help lay the foundation for quality early childhood education. These policies establish a process for everyone to follow, assign responsibility to key personnel, and offer guidance for actions. Safety policies may take the form of checklists or injury reports, sometimes guidelines, practices or strategies that can decrease risk. Safety policies help teachers develop proper practices based on knowledge of their safety, risk prevention, protection, and promotion. In week 9, we looked at how we can support our team members and operate as an effective member of a team. This doesn't mean that all team members share all tasks equally, and it doesn't mean that it's fair to expect unqualified staff to take leadership roles. However, all individuals do bring varied skills and knowledge that they use as part of a team. People can also learn additional skills and knowledge from others around them. An educational leader can help others reflect on their practice, on what's going well and what changes they could make. And really good educational leaders do this for themselves too, and they invite critique and feedback on their own processes and practices. So it's not something that they just guide others to do, but they also involve themselves in that reflection practice as well, and model how to acknowledge where there might be gaps. Professional reflection and change takes great leadership. The educational leader will involve colleagues to read the EYLF, for example, help them interpret what it means, encourage conversations about current practice and ideal practice, and ensure that everybody involved in the decisions about changes that are going to affect them has a say. If you are a non-threatening person and people feel comfortable with you, then they're more likely to share their work, their ideas, and they'll gradually become more willing to try new strategies and reflect upon how they went. So getting those workplace relationships right and getting them to function well is a significant challenge for all people, but it's something that can certainly ensure that high quality care is provided. The EYLF identifies that this process of critical reflection and this process of ongoing professional learning underpins effective early childhood pedagogy. So the goal being the person who's being taught is going to end up being more skilled or knowing more, and then they're going to be able to use that knowledge for themselves and apply that new practice. So when we know better, we do better. Principle 7 about critical reflection and ongoing professional learning invites us to reflect upon particular questions. So things like, are we achieving or have we achieved our goals? How do we know we have achieved them? What's going well? How do we know it's going well? What hampered us? What happened? What were some mitigating circumstances? As reflective practice involves engaging with these questions, we gather information to help answer them, and we critically examine what's happening and reflect upon what might be changed. Collaborative leadership and teamwork are built on a sense of this shared responsibility and professional accountability for children's learning, development, and well-being. So what that means is if something is going well, then we get to take credit for it going well and look at what went into this thing going well. Like, what were the efforts and involved in the processes and documentation and materials that helped this succeed. And if something is not going well, it's about taking responsibility and then again examining what might be needed, what materials are needed, what personnel is needed, what training is needed, what process might need to be changed to be able to address any gaps in identified gaps in learning, in care, etc. It takes a great deal of collaboration to be able to critically reflect. So Principle 8, collaborative leadership and teamwork, goes hand in hand with Principle 7, critical reflection. The EYLF states that it's a view of leadership that empowers all members of the team to use their professional knowledge and skills in ways that can assist everyone to do the best that they can for children, to do the best that they can for families and for colleagues in their setting. This course also briefly explored those potential points of challenge. So sometimes as educational leaders, we might end up dealing with some resistance in the workplace, sometimes just a pocket of resistance. And there can sometimes be legitimate reasons for people not necessarily being on board with some of the decisions that we are bringing or feel that need to be brought to our particular service. Fear of the unknown, having a lack of good information, fear of loss of security, not seeing a reason to change, maybe a fear of loss of power, or not having the adequate resources for the change that's being suggested. Maybe it's bad timing. Maybe there are mitigating circumstances or contextual factors that just make it not a good time. And breaking habits can be all reasons for people resisting change. And there will be people who have some sort of aversion to change in any workplace. And you may also have people who have a risk, a change bias. So people who are particularly excited by change. So managing all of those different processes in people can be quite challenging in and of itself. And we as educational leaders need to have ways that we can address those. So to overcome this resistance, some of the following criteria can be met. What is the benefit? In other words, what is it that we're going to get from changing? The change should have a really clear advantage being articulated to those who are being asked to change. So it needs to be viewed as this is a better way. And so we need to be really clear and honest about why it's going to be better. Is it compatible? Is the change going to be as compatible as possible with the existing values and experiences of the people who are being asked to change? So in other words, is this the right change for here? For this place, for this context. Complexity. The change shouldn't be more complex than it has to be. It must be as easy as possible for people to understand and use. Otherwise, even though it might be a beneficial change, if the process to get to that change is overly complex, then it can be doomed to fail. And the notion of tryability. The change should be something that people can try on a step-by-step basis and make adjustments as things progress. So one of the key components of change management that I've seen work really well is if it's going to be a significant change, maybe there are just a couple of people in the workplace who can start that change and trial it, and then they can actually reflect upon their experience and share that with the broader group. And in that way, people are hearing from their colleagues who they already know and trust about what were their discoveries as part of that early adoption process. And also, they can also flag potential issues that might arise, and then you can gradually build more momentum and involve more people in that process until you hit that critical mass. People require a lot of education and communication about change before it's implemented. You can't just spring it on them quickly with no explanation. They need to see the logic behind the reasoning. Allowing people to get involved and to participate, making sure that we listen to ideas, form task forces and committees so that there is a lot of buy-in. We need to facilitate and support people through change. Sometimes we need to provide additional emotional resources or physical material resources to be able to equip people to make this new leap, especially if they're having trouble with adjusting to change. Sometimes we have to be prepared to negotiate. We may have to compromise on the journey, but not on the destination. In other words, this is the place we're going, this is where we're going to end up. Maybe we can look a little bit differently about how we're going to get there. So if someone's having a very big resistance to change, it might be a matter of sitting down with them and coming to a bit of a negotiation or agreement or a compromise about, okay, what we're currently doing is clearly not working for you. How can I help you make a change in a different way so that we can still get to where we're going as an organisation? We need to be mindful about manipulation and co-optation and any coercion. Attempts to influence others need to be done in a persuasive and honest way, not in a manipulative way or in a dishonest way. And sometimes we need to be mindful of power imbalances in those conversations. Educational leaders and principals do have more authority to be able to get people to pivot to change, and we need to make sure that we are using that with the best interests of the children and the service and the school at the centre of those decision-making processes, and explain those to employees who might be experiencing difficulty with change. In week 10, we unpacked relationships with children and families. We had a bit of a deep look at having some clear understandings and some empathy for the challenges that lots of families might be facing in their lives. Having assurance that family values, beliefs and customs are being supported at school and being supported in daycare. Making sure that we as early childhood educators listen to parents as individuals and also spend time getting to know our families well. Showing an interest in their different perspectives, even if it's really different or disagree with us on some point of view, still being open to those points of feedback, and building upon a family's strengths. Educators further develop their knowledge about child development and learning and parenting practices in the context of different families' cultural backgrounds. So sometimes it's a matter of further developing our skills and confidence to share this knowledge appropriately with parents and carers. We want our families to feel welcomed, to feel known, accepted, seen, respected. We need to avoid referring to parents as they. They never read the notice board. They seem happy enough with the program. They just dropped off and didn't speak to me. Making sure we don't generalize about parents is something that can help us appear more professional too in the way that we're speaking to our colleagues and others. Having a happy face on staff and children, having that right blend of positivity and authenticity. So we don't want to be plastering smiles on our faces that are clearly not genuine. We need to be able to be in a place where we are ready and welcome and healthy. An assurance that attention is being paid to their child is an important factor of being a parent. They don't just want their children to be looked after, they want their children to be cared for. And they want them to be really known by the people who care for their child. And they want their child to know you too. It is an investment relationship. They are investing in you, and we invest in them and their children. Families want to be given lots of information about what's happening and to be asked for their views. Occasionally they'll say to us, oh, it's too many notices, too much in the newsletter, or I haven't read it yet. we still put it out there. Okay, we are still invitational. It is much better to over communicate than under communicate. If people haven't read stuff, you've still made it available to them, and you can support them with that process if it's overwhelming them. We want to invite lots of input onto program decisions from families. Some will engage with this process and some won't. Again, we are invitational at all times. We make sure that we share and celebrate the achievements of their child and the milestones that they're making, and also just their day, making sure that we're sharing different parts of their day and communicating actively, regularly. We make sure we listen to what parents have to say about their own child's capabilities and interests, and we make use of those observations for future planning, encouraging parents to be active in this planning process and understanding that we might need to be setting some immediate goals, maybe some medium-term goals, and then there might be some long-term goals for children as well. We can help offer learning at home directly by suggesting activities to be tried or learning out materials, exchanging materials that may complement what's happening in the family setting and in the childcare setting. The more we can develop effective relationships between families and educators, the more we can support parents and carers through the provision of information and education, the better we're able to enable the development of these really robust support networks, which all result in a higher quality of care for children. In week 11, we had a closer look at occupational health and safety. The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 2000, together with the Occupational Safety and Health Regulations of 96, are the principal legislation that governs occupational safety and health in the Western Australian workplaces. According to the provisions of the OSH Act and of the Code of Ethics, all childcare providers and schools have a legal and ethical responsibility to put in place all procedures and processes that develop, promote, and maintain a safe and healthy working environment for all members of staff. And this includes carers, teachers, children, their parents, guardians, community members, and other persons who are legally present on school premises. It's essential that risk management policies are evident so that they can identify any potential hazards in areas, such as buildings, on the grounds, the use of any machinery or equipment, the use and storage of chemicals and other hazardous substances, all manual handling processes, sun protection inclusive of staff, workplace security, hygiene and infection control, first aid, and a commitment to ongoing staff training. We discussed one of those uniform policy examples in week 11. We talked about the expectation that we wear closed shoes. Sometimes this is a relaxed policy, and occasionally, being a hot country in Australia, we do tend to get away with the sort of slides or Birkenstocks and things like that. Be aware that in some schools and in some centres, those would not be adequate foot protection. Risk management is the foundation of health and safety and of keeping children safe. And as with all risk management, you identify the workplace risk or hazard. So this might be through a checklist or a scheduled regular inspection. Then you assess the risk. How likely is it? What's the probability? And how great is the risk? What's the severity? Then we control or manage the risk. So we put into place some sort of mitigating action to do something about it. And then we monitor and improve safety, and we keep records of everything. Employees do have a legal obligation to cooperate with employers to maintain a safe workplace. So there's a dual responsibility, legal obligation for the employer to the employee, but also for the employee to the employer. And then last week in week 12, we had a look at the Australian Professional Standards and Teacher Registration processes. Part of being a teacher is about improving our quality. So that sort of journey of self-improvement and professional development is an ongoing, career-long journey. It is an essential part of Australia's reform efforts to improve student attainment and to ensure that we do have a world-class system of education. International and local education systems have developed their own professional standards so that we can attract and develop and recognise and retain quality teachers. Teachers are initially granted provisional registration, and this indicates that they have met all the graduate career stage of the National Professional Standards for Teachers. And we discussed and had a quick look at those graduate standards last week. To achieve a full registration status, teachers must demonstrate achievement at the proficient career stage of the National Professional Standards. Those standards comprise of 7 standards, which I'll outline on the next slide, and these are things that teachers should know and be able to do. They are connected, interdependent, and they do overlap. And those standards contribute to the professionalisation of teaching, and it raises the status of our profession. The 7 standards are grouped under 3 domains: professional knowledge, professional practice, and professional engagement. Each of those standards also has elements within. Standard 1, Know Students and How They Learn, has 6 elements. Standard 2, Know the Content and How to Teach It, also 6 elements. Standard 3, Plan for and Implement Effective Teaching and Learning. There are 7 elements in Standard 3. Standard 4, Create and maintain supportive and safe learning environments. There are 5 elements within Standard 4. Standard 5, Assess, provide feedback and report on student learning. Standard 5 has 5 elements. Standard 6, Engage in professional learning, 4 elements. And Standard 7, Engage professionally with colleagues, parents or carers in the community, has 4 elements. So there are 37 elements in total, and you work towards these throughout your degree, gathering evidence at graduate level. And then as you embark upon the first few years of your career, you can start to compile a bit of a dossier of your achievements among all of those, and then apply for full registration. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of lecture 13, which is the end of the lectures for this course. Well done on all of your achievements so far this semester, and particularly for this course. Thank you all for a really enjoyable semester. I had a great time getting to know you during the tutorials and helping you along your learning journey. Please take care of yourselves and one another, especially through the exam period and through your prac times. And good luck with all of your future studies. I wish you all the best in your future careers, and I hope to work with you again and see you again in the future. Say hi when you walk past me in the courtyard, and congratulations. Well done, everybody.